So we're gonna move now into another section of the unit about persuasion.
Raul, can you read our goal for today, please?
The unit is called Persuasion Across Time and Space, Analyzing and Producing Complex Text. The unit runs around the nature of texts that intend to persuade audiences about specific ideas or issues.
The unit was developed to provide an exemplar for teachers and others to begin to rethink how instruction for English learners might be planned and enacted in order for English learners to have the maximum opportunities to meet the Common Core standards.
The second question, can you read that one for me, please, Ephraim?
Were you able to convince the other person you were arguing with about anything?
What's convince mean?
To persuade.
Persuade.
It's really essential to understand that the unit that we are talking about today was developed for English learners at least at the intermediate level of English language proficiencies. This unit was not developed for beginning level English learners, brand newcomers. So students at the intermediate level in a unit that provides sufficient support not only are able to engage with their mainstream peers, their native English speaking peers or students with greater level of English language proficiency than they have, but those students also provide an important source of models for different ways to carry out conversations, for ways to engage with text. So it's important for English learners to be able to engage with students of a variety of backgrounds in order to engage in activities around complex text. So the Common Core standards call upon all students to engage in language and literacy activities that focus on disciplinary practices at the heart of the various content areas. And so in English language arts, the Common Core standards call on students to engage in texts of increasing complexity, to use writing for building arguments in relation with complex texts, to use speaking and listening skills to engage in debates, to talk about important ideas, to build knowledge together with other students, to present that knowledge to an audience, to discuss that knowledge in small groups, and to use language in meaningful and creative ways.
We have our second or third question too.
Okay.
Okay, we said that he wants people to take action against the civil rights, and then we're going to use the quote where it says,
So this creates challenges for all students. For English learners, there are obviously additional challenges because English learners are going to be engaging in these practices in a language that they're still in the process of developing.
In your group of 4, decide who's going to go first, and you're going to share out your partner's story. We're not commenting on the stories until everyone has shared.
One memorable argument that Raul has had was when they were arguing of if he should go to the baseball practice or not.
These challenges are also opportunities because the kinds of challenges presented in the Common Core with appropriate support can be the very kinds of language learning opportunities that English learners need to be able to engage in increasingly interesting and meaningful and important and challenging discourse.
We have crafted a whole system of scaffolds or supports throughout the unit. Scaffolding is the temporary support that is offered students so that they can work beyond their current level of autonomy. But scaffolding has precisely as its goal the fostering of student autonomy, because it is providing supports only while those supports are needed. And these supports are sometimes supports that are academic, conceptual, linguistic, but they're always woven together.
Every group is going to read just one speech and then go back to your home group and you're going to report on that speech. If you look in your book, there's background reading for each of these speeches. So if you're reading the Wallace speech, you read background on the Wallace speech.
The language learning opportunities are embedded in the rich and meaningful instruction, with specific focus in many places on language and literacy, but not separated from the kinds of activities and practices called for by the Common Core standards. So we're not talking about removing English learners from the challenges of the standards, but rather finding ways to support them in meeting them.
The unit has 5 lessons. Each lesson is intended to last 1 week. So the unit begins with an exploration of advertising in the contemporary world.
The language of advertisements is something students are often very familiar with, and they're familiar with now multimodal ways of communicating, often more so than their teachers are. So we start with a place where students are more familiar and move on to less familiar kinds of texts.
Lesson 2 goes into the Gettysburg Address.
We focus on speeches because speeches often include very rich language. They include opportunities to think and talk and learn about both historical issues and contemporary issues.
Why was Lincoln there at the field that day? What was his purpose?
Wasn't it like to open like the first cemetery?
The main goal of that lesson is to help teachers understand the importance of building background understandings, but also to help students recognize how things begin, unpack, and end, right? We have a sense of every text doing something and how it's done in a speech, but also how specific words and the repetition, for example, of specific words confer importance to key ideas.
Does anyone remember the sentence off the top of their head that uses the word proposition? Do you think you have it, Alexis?
Is it like the proposition that all men are created equal?
Yes,
or something?
exactly.
Lesson 3 looks at the 3 appeals that a persuasive text usually presents. So we look at logos, how the logic on the argument is constructed. We look at pathos, the textual elements that bring emotion to a text, and ethos, which is an appeal to the authority that the author presents, but also to the ethical sense of the reader or listener.
Logos is having reason and logic to persuade, so it's more like facts. So, like maybe a campaign commercial for a president.
In lesson 4, we hone in to the very specific language that signals the overall discourse structure of speeches, but also very potently at the word choices and how word choices do make a difference in a text.
What's the first sentence?
When I discovered information today, I can see the same pattern changes have come about.
So it sounds like she's starting to talk about today. Okay.
And then finally, in lesson 5, we build on the multiple connections that students have been making about persuasive text so that they use it to create their own speeches and then critique their peers' work. Each lesson comes in 3 important moments. The first moment we call preparing learners. When we are preparing to approach a text, we either want to activate prior knowledge that the learners have, or we want to build background knowledge, as for example with the Gettysburg Address. Then you bring the text and you help students interact with the text. So there are a number of activities that, for example, pick out a chunk of the text, help them deconstruct that chunk, and then reconnect it back to what is the logic that is being followed in the text.
I'm going to give each of you a little section of this speech, okay? You and your group, you're going to try to put it back in order.
The third moment is called extending understanding. So by now, students have understood what the text is about. But they need to take that universe that they have learned and connect it to other ideas that they have been developing, or connect them to the world or other situations.
What do you mean? All right. Please please stick your piece of paper in your yellow book because we'll revisit this tomorrow, okay?
The objective of the unit is to provide a model for how we can engage students, and we feel very happy that teachers who worked with us in a pre-pilot and a pilot are all really delighted, and that many of them were surprised that English learners could talk so much and that they could work with such difficult texts. And that's exactly the kind of surprise we want our teachers to get, but more importantly, the assurance that this is the case and that that can only be done if we understand the nature of learning, which is the ability to participate in activity beyond our autonomy level, and the importance of nourishing student voice and agency.